The rejection ceremony was supposed to be private. That's what Leora had been told by the royal messenger who'd arrived at her family's modest cottage 3 days prior. A quiet dissolution of bonds not yet fully formed. A severing that would hurt, but at least preserve what remained of her dignity. Instead, she stood in the center of the Moonvale Court's grand hall, surrounded by hundreds of wolves whose eyes glittered with a mixture of pity and barely concealed satisfaction at her humiliation. The triplet Alpha Kings stood before her on the raised obsidian dais, identical in their devastating beauty, yet distinct in the way they held themselves. Cassian, Theron, and Lysander Nightshade, the most powerful alphas in the 5 territories, bound by blood and a primordial prophecy to rule as one unified force. And they were about to reject her publicly. Leora's fingers trembled as she clutched the hem of her simple gray dress, the only formal clothing she owned. Around her, the assembled nobility wore silks and furs, their jewelry catching the light from the massive chandeliers overhead. She was a sparrow among peacocks, and everyone in the hall knew it. "State your full name for the record." Cassian's voice cut through the hushed whispers like a blade through silk. He was the eldest by mere minutes, the strategist, the one whose storm-gray eyes could dissect a person's worth with a single glance. Those eyes swept over her now with cold dismissal. Leora lifted her chin, forcing her voice steady despite the way her heart hammered against her ribs. "Leora Ashenmere, of the Thornwick Pack." "A farming pack," someone whispered loudly enough to be heard. Cruel laughter rippled through the crowd. Theron stepped forward, his muscular frame radiating the controlled violence of a born warrior. Where Cassian was calculation, Theron was pure, brutal efficiency. "Do you understand why you've been summoned, Miss Ashenmere?" Miss. Not even the courtesy of using her given name. Leora felt the word like a slap, but she kept her expression neutral. "I was told the bond would be severed." "The bond?" Lysander spoke for the first time, and despite everything, Leora felt her treacherous heart skip. He was the youngest triplet, the one whose amber eyes had once looked at her with something that might have been warmth during their 3 brief encounters. The empath, they called him. The one who could feel the emotions of those around him. "There is no bond, Miss Ashenmere. That's precisely the problem." The words struck deeper than any blade could have. 6 weeks ago, the primordial moonstone, a relic that chose compatible mates for the royal bloodline, had glowed in Leora's presence. Not brightly, not with the legendary brilliance described in the old tales, but it had glowed, faintly, enough that the Council of Elders had declared her a potential mate for the triplets. Potential. Not confirmed, not chosen, just potential. The moonstone's light was barely a flicker, Cassian continued, his tone clinical, as if he were discussing crop yields rather than destroying someone's future. The elders were mistaken to interpret such a weak response as a true mating sign. "We require a queen who can stand beside us in power," Theron added, his voice echoing through the hall. "Not a farmer's daughter who can barely shift into her wolf form." The crowd's murmurs grew louder. Leora felt heat crawl up her neck, but she refused to look away from the 3 males who held her fate in their hands. It was true. Her wolf was small, barely larger than a common gray wolf, with none of the supernatural size or strength that marked true alpha bloodlines. But that didn't make the public acknowledgement hurt any less. "In the 6 weeks since the false calling," Lysander said, and there was the barest hint of something in his voice. "Regret? Guilt," before it vanished. "We have searched for any sign of a true bond forming. There has been nothing. No connection. No recognition of mate bond between us." "Because you never gave it a chance to form," Leora wanted to scream. "Because you kept me at arm's length, allowed me only 3 supervised visits, treated me like a curiosity rather than a person." But she said nothing. What good would it do? "Therefore," Cassian's voice rang out with formal authority, "we, the triplet Alpha Kings of the Silverwood Territories, do formally and publicly reject the bond suggestion made by the Council of Elders. We reject you, Leora Ashenmere, as a potential mate and future queen. The words hung in the air like a death knell. Around the hall, wolves shifted uncomfortably. Even among the nobility who'd mocked her, there was something unsettling about such a public, brutal rejection. It wasn't done this way, not usually. Private ceremonies protected both parties from exactly this kind of humiliation. Leora felt something crack inside her chest. Not her heart. That would be too simple. This was deeper, more fundamental. The faint thread of possibility that had been growing since that first moonstone glow, the fragile hope she'd barely allowed herself to acknowledge, snapped like a dried twig. And in its place, something else bloomed. Something sharp and cold and clarifying. Pride. She straightened her spine, lifted her chin higher, and met each of their gazes in turn. Cassian's cold gray eyes, Theron's hard amber, Lysander's conflicted gold. Let them see that they hadn't broken her. Let them see that she was more than the weak farmer's daughter they believed her to be. I, Leora Ashenmere of the Thornwick Pack, she said clearly, her voice carrying to every corner of the silent hall. Accept your rejection. The words were barely out of her mouth when she felt it. A lance of white-hot agony straight through her chest, as if someone had driven a spike through her sternum. She inhaled sharply, stumbling, but caught herself before she could fall. Around her, several wolves drew breath in shock. They could smell it now, the sharp scent of a bond breaking, even one as fragile as theirs had been. But Leora wasn't finished. Furthermore, she continued, forcing the words past the torment radiating through her body. I thank you for your honesty, your majesties. The title came out with just the faintest edge of mockery. You've shown me exactly what kind of males you are, the kind who care more for power and appearance than honor, the kind who would humiliate someone publicly rather than grant them the dignity of a private rejection. The kind who will make terrible kings because you lack the most basic capacity for compassion. The hall erupted. Shouts of outrage. Someone called for her to be seized for insolence. But Leora wasn't looking at the crowd anymore. She was watching the three males on the dais, watching as her words struck home. Cassian's expression had frozen, the cold calculation replaced by something that looked almost like shock. Theron had gone completely still, the warrior's readiness evaporating into stunned immobility. And Lysander had gone pale, his hand pressed to his chest as if he could feel the echo of her anguish. I wish you well in finding your true queen, Leora said, her voice softer now but no less cutting. I hope she's everything I could never be, powerful, political, perfect. She paused, let the words settle. And I hope she makes you utterly miserable because that's exactly what you deserve. With that, she turned on her heel and walked toward the massive doors at the far end of the hall, her head high despite the way her vision was starting to blur at the edges. Each step sent fresh waves of suffering through her body, the bond breaking completely now, severing connections that had barely begun to form but were real enough to cause devastation in their dissolution. She made it halfway across the hall before the real anguish hit. It started as a burning in her veins, like liquid fire racing through her bloodstream. Leora's step faltered, and she pressed a hand to her chest, feeling her heart hammering erratically. This wasn't normal. Bond rejections hurt, yes, but this felt like dying. Behind her, she heard movement on the dais, Lysander's voice sharp with sudden alarm. Something's wrong. But Leora didn't stop, couldn't stop. If she stopped now, she would collapse. And she refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing her fall. She pushed through the torment, through the burning, through the growing numbness spreading from her chest to her limbs. The doors loomed before her. 20 more steps. 15. 10. Her vision was definitely blurring now, dark spots appearing at the edges. The whispers of the crowd had become a dull roar in her ears, indistinguishable from the sound of her own blood rushing through her veins. 5 steps. She could hear running footsteps behind her now, voices raised in concern or command. She couldn't tell which anymore. Everything was fading, sound and sight and sensation all bleeding together into one overwhelming tide of suffering. 3 steps. Her legs were giving out. She could feel it happening, her knees buckling, her body shutting down in response to trauma it wasn't meant to endure. 1 step. Leora's hand found the cold metal of the door handle just as her legs finally gave out completely. She used her momentum to push the door open, letting herself fall forward through the threshold and into the corridor beyond. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was a flash of movement. 3 male figures rushing toward her, their faces twisted with horror and something that looked dangerously close to panic. Then nothing. Cassian reached her first, his superior speed allowing him to catch Leora's falling body before she could hit the marble floor. The moment his hands touched her skin, he recoiled as if burned. She was on fire, not metaphorically. Her skin was literally radiating heat so intense it was excruciating to touch. Her face had gone from pale to flushed, sweat beading on her forehead despite the cool temperature of the corridor. Her eyes were closed, her breathing rapid and shallow. "Get a healer!" Theron shouted, dropping to his knees beside his brother. "Now!" The crowd from the grand hall had surged forward, nobles and courtiers pressing through the doorway to witness the spectacle. Their shocked reactions and hurried whispers created a cacophony that made Cassian's head pound. Lysander pushed through, his face ashen. The moment he came within a few feet of Leora's unconscious form, he stumbled, pressing a hand to his chest with a pained sound. "What is it?" Cassian demanded, looking up at his youngest brother. Her anguish. Lysander's voice was strained. "I can feel it. It's gods. It's like nothing I've ever felt before. It's not just emotional. It's physical. Her body is tearing itself apart from the inside." "That's impossible," Theron said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Rejection sickness doesn't... This isn't normal rejection sickness." The voice came from Elder Morgana, who had appeared at the edge of the crowd, her weathered face grave. She moved forward with surprising speed for her age, kneeling beside Leora's prone form. Her gnarled hands hovered over the young woman's chest, and her eyes, milky with age but still sharp, widened in alarm. "What's happening to her?" Cassian heard the edge of panic in his own voice and hated it. Hated that this slip of a girl, this weak, insignificant farmer's daughter, could make him feel anything at all. Elder Morgana's gaze snapped to the 3 brothers, and for the first time in Cassian's life, he saw genuine anger in the old woman's eyes. "What's happening? You 3 fools just rejected your true mate in the most brutal fashion possible. That's what's happening." "She's not our true mate," Cassian said automatically. "The moonstone barely..." "The moonstone glowed," Morgana interrupted sharply. "Faintly, yes, because she's human-born." The words fell like stones into water, sending ripples of shock through the assembled wolves. "Human-born?" Theron repeated, his voice strangled. "Her mother was human. Her father was a low-ranking wolf from Thornwick. Their mating produced a daughter with diluted wolf blood. Weak by our standards, but still pack." Morgana's hands moved over Leora's body, examining, assessing. "The moonstone recognized her as your mate despite her mixed heritage. The weak glow wasn't a sign of incompatibility, it was adjusted for her diminished power. For her, that flicker was the equivalent of the brilliant blaze it shows for pure bloodmates." Cassian felt as if the ground had dropped out from beneath him. "Why weren't we told?" "Because it wasn't relevant." Morgana's voice cracked like a whip. "A mate is a mate, regardless of bloodline. Or it should be. But you 3 were so concerned with appearances, with finding a queen who looked powerful enough to stand beside you, that you couldn't see what was right in front of you." Lysander had sunk to the floor, his face buried in his hands. Through their brother bond, Cassian could feel his youngest brother's anguish, the empathic feedback loop of Leora's suffering and Lysander's horror creating something unbearable. "Can you save her?" Theron's voice was quiet, deadly serious. Morgana's expression was grim. "I don't know. In all my centuries, I've never seen a true mate bond rejected so completely. Usually there's hesitation, reluctance, The bond forms slowly over time before a rejection might occur, giving both parties a chance to adjust. But this, she gestured to Leora's trembling form. You rejected her before the bond could properly establish itself. Her wolf is trying to sever something that was barely there to begin with, and the incomplete connection is causing catastrophic damage. There must be something, Cassian started. If there is, I haven't found it yet. Morgana stood, her joints cracking. I'll take her to the healing ward, but understand this, your majesties. The title dripped with disdain. If she dies, her death is on your hands. The moon goddess doesn't look kindly on those who reject her gifts. Two healers appeared with a stretcher, carefully lifting Leora's burning body. As they carried her away, Cassian noticed something that made his blood run cold. Where her skin had touched his hands, there were marks. Not burns, exactly. More like silver scars, as if her very essence had branded him. Delicate swirling patterns that looked almost like writing in a language he didn't recognize. He looked at his brothers and saw identical marks on Theron's arms where he'd tried to help catch her, and on Lysander's hands where he'd reached out in instinctive comfort. The physical manifestation of a bond they'd just destroyed. 3 hours later, Cassian stood in his private study, staring at the silver marks on his palms. They hadn't faded. If anything, they'd grown, more pronounced, the delicate patterns spreading up his wrists like vines. The door opened without a knock. Only his brothers would dare such familiarity. She's stable, Theron announced without preamble, though his face said the news wasn't entirely good. For now. Her fever broke an hour ago, but Morgana says her body is in a state of shock. The bond severing caused damage they're still trying to assess. Will she live? Cassian asked, surprised by how much the answer mattered. Morgana doesn't know. Lysander's voice was hoarse, as if he'd been screaming. Perhaps he had. Empaths often vocalized the anguish they absorbed from others. Her wolf is broken. That's the word Morgana used. The rejection shattered something fundamental in her spirit. Cassian turned away from his brothers, facing the window that overlooked the moonlit gardens. We did what was necessary. The kingdom needs a strong queen, not— Don't! Theron's voice was sharp. Don't justify this. We humiliated her publicly because we were too proud to admit that the Moonstone might have chosen someone unexpected. I felt nothing when I looked at her, Cassian said. But even as the words left his mouth, he knew them for the lie they were. He'd felt something. A pull. Faint, but persistent. He'd dismissed it as curiosity, or perhaps pity for the out-of-place girl thrust into royal politics. Because you didn't want to feel anything, Lysander said quietly. None of us did. She wasn't what we expected, what we wanted, so we convinced ourselves the bond wasn't real. Silence fell over the study. In the distance, Cassian could hear the night watch changing shifts, the normal sounds of the castle continuing as if nothing world-shattering had occurred. The marks aren't fading, Theron said, holding up his own scarred arms. I've tried everything. Healing magic, herbal remedies. Nothing works. Because they're not wounds, Lysander said. They're proof. Physical evidence of the bond we tried to deny. He laughed, the sound bitter and broken. The moon goddess has a sense of irony. We rejected our mate, so now we'll carry the scars of that rejection for everyone to see. Cassian looked down at his hands again, at the intricate silver patterns that marked him as— what? A fool? A failure? A king who'd thrown away the greatest gift the moon goddess could offer because it came in an unexpected package? We have to fix this, he said suddenly. His brothers turned to look at him. Fix what? Theron asked carefully. This. Us. What we did to her. Cassian faced his brothers fully. When she wakes. If she wakes, we need to apologize. Formally. Publicly. Reverse the rejection if such a thing is possible. Morgana says it might not be, Lysander warned. The damage to the bond might be permanent. And even if we could somehow repair it? He paused, meeting Cassian's eyes. Why would she want us? After what we did to her? After how we humiliated her? She wouldn't, Theron said, flatly. If our positions were reversed, would you forgive such a betrayal? No. The answer came immediately. Honestly. Cassian wouldn't forgive. Couldn't forgive. And if that was true for him, why would it be any different for her? But he had to try. Had to find a way to make this right, because the alternative, living the rest of his life knowing he'd destroyed his true mate, was unbearable. Then we'll earn her forgiveness, Cassian said. However long it takes. A knock at the door interrupted them. One of the healers stood in the doorway, her face pale with urgency. Your Majesties, you need to come quickly. Cassian's heart dropped. Is she? She's gone, the healer said. Miss Ashenmere. She woke 10 minutes ago, overpowered 2 guards and fled the castle. We've searched the grounds, but there's no sign of her. It's like she vanished into thin air. The pre-dawn forest was alive with the sounds of the hunt. Cassian ran through the undergrowth in wolf form, his massive silver body moving with lethal grace between time-worn trees. Beside him, Theron's darker gray wolf and Lysander's lighter ash-colored form kept pace, the 3 of them moving in the synchronized pattern they'd perfected over decades of ruling together. But this wasn't a hunt for prey. This was a search for their mate. 6 hours had passed since Leora's escape. 6 hours of searching the castle grounds, the surrounding villages, the forest paths that led away from the capital. 6 hours of finding nothing, not a trace of her scent, not a single clue about which direction she'd fled. It was impossible. No wolf could hide their scent so completely, especially not one as weak as they'd believed Leora to be, unless they'd been wrong about how weak she was. Anything? Cassian sent through the brother bond, the telepathic link that connected the 3 of them. Nothing, Theron responded, frustration clear in his mental voice. It's like she's a ghost. No tracks, no scent trail, nothing. She's masking herself somehow, Lysander added, but I don't understand how. She barely has enough power to shift. How could she have the magical reserves to hide from an entire pack of trained trackers? It was a question that had been plaguing Cassian since the search began. Everything they'd known, or thought they'd known, about Leora Ashenmere was being called into question. Weak farmer's daughter who could barely shift? Yet she'd overpowered 2 trained castle guards while still recovering from near death. Insignificant human-born wolf? Yet she'd managed to completely erase her scent trail, a feat that required considerable magical ability. Meek and easily dismissed, yet she'd stood before them in the grand hall and spoken with more courage and dignity than most warriors twice her size. They'd underestimated her. Badly. The sound of approaching wolves made all 3 brothers skid to a halt. A patrol emerged from the northern tree line, led by Commander Wraith, one of their most experienced trackers. Cassian shifted back to human form, unconcerned by his nakedness. Modesty was a human concept that served no purpose among wolves. His brothers followed suit, the 3 of them standing in a loose triangle as Wraith approached and shifted as well. Report, Cassian commanded. Wraith's expression was grim. Nothing, Your Majesty. We've covered the entire northern quadrant. No sign of her, but... He hesitated. But what? Theron demanded. We found evidence of another presence. Not Miss Ashenmere. Someone, or something else, was in the forest tonight. The scent is strange. Not pack, not rogue. Something... other. A chill ran down Cassian's spine. Other how? I'm not certain, but if I had to guess? Wraith met his king's eyes. Witch magic. There's a residue in the air. Faint, but present. Someone used powerful magic in these woods within the last few hours. Lysander stepped forward. You're saying a witch took her? I'm saying a witch was here, Wraith corrected. Whether they took her, helped her, or were tracking her themselves, I can't determine. But they left a trail heading east, toward the Shadowfen Marshes. The Shadowfen Marshes. Cassian's jaw clenched. The marshes were neutral territory, claimed by neither pack nor coven. They were also notoriously dangerous, home to creatures that predated the treaty between wolves and witches, things that recognized no law but hunger. "Assemble a tracking party," Cassian ordered. 20 of our best. We leave in 10 minutes. But before Wraith could acknowledge the command, a howl split the air. Not the normal communication howl of a pack wolf. This was something else entirely. Something desperate and filled with anguish. Every wolf present froze, their heads turning toward the sound. "That came from the eastern border," Theron said, already beginning to shift. "Near the Thornwick territory." Thornwick. Leora's home pack. Without another word, all three brothers shifted and ran. They covered the miles to the Thornwick border in minutes, their powerful bodies eating up ground with supernatural speed. But as they approached the small farming community, Cassian felt his blood turn to ice. Smoke. He could smell smoke, and beneath it, the copper tang of blood. They burst into the clearing that housed Thornwick's central village to find chaos. Buildings burning, bodies on the ground. Survivors huddled in terrified groups, many bearing wounds from what had clearly been an attack. And in the center of it all, illuminated by the flames, stood a figure in dark robes marked with symbols that made Cassian's skin crawl. A witch. But not just any witch. The robes marked her as a member of the Crimson Order, a faction that had been outlawed decades ago for practicing blood magic. The witch turned as the brothers approached, her face hidden beneath a deep hood. When she spoke, her voice carried an unnatural echo, as if multiple people were speaking in unison. "Ah, the triplet kings arrive at last. Too late, as always." Cassian shifted to human form, his brothers flanking him immediately. "What have you done here?" "Nothing that wasn't deserved." The witch's laughter was like broken glass. "This pathetic pack harbored something precious. Something that was promised to my order long ago." "If you're looking for treasure, you chose poorly," Theron growled. "Thornwick has nothing of value." "Didn't they?" The witch cocked her head. "Strange, because we were told that Thornwick Pack produced a very special daughter. One marked by prophecy. One whose power is only now beginning to wake." Lysander stepped forward, his empathic senses extended. "You're looking for Leora." "Was that her name?" The witch sounded amused. "How delicate. We have many names for what she is. Catalyst, Key, Abomination. My personal favorite is the Breaker of Chains. But that's rather dramatic." "She's not here," Cassian said, working to keep his voice level despite the rage building in his chest. "These people, Leora's people, had been attacked because of her. Because of something she was. Something none of them had known about." "Oh, I know she's not here." The witch gestured carelessly at the burning village. "These simpletons told us she fled to the capital weeks ago. Something about being chosen by the Moonstone?" Another laugh. "How ironic. The kings claim their mate, only to reject her before she can fully come into her power. The moon goddess must be laughing herself sick." "What power?" Lysander demanded. "What are you talking about?" "You really don't know, do you?" The witch's amusement was palpable. "The great triplet kings, so concerned with breeding and bloodlines, and you didn't even recognize what you had. Your little farmer's daughter isn't weak, your majesties. She's dormant. There's a difference." Before any of them could respond, the witch raised her arms and the ground beneath their feet began to tremble. "A dormant power that, when awakened, could reshape the balance between all our kinds," the witch continued, her voice rising. "A power that my order has sought for generations, and you just threw her away like garbage." Dark energy erupted from the witch's hands, forcing the brothers to dive aside. Cassian rolled to his feet, already shifting mid-movement. But the witch was faster, vanishing in a swirl of shadow and smoke before any of them could reach her. Her final words echoed through the clearing. "Find her before we do, little kings. Or what happened here tonight will seem merciful compared to what's coming." Then she was gone, leaving only destruction and too many questions in her wake. Cassian shifted back to human form, surveying the damage. Theron was already moving among the survivors, helping the injured. Lysander stood frozen, his face pale with shock. "She's in danger," Lysander whispered. "Leora." She's not just running from us. She's running from them. And she doesn't even know what she's running toward. Cassian felt something cold and heavy settle in his chest. They'd rejected her, humiliated her, driven her away into a world where powerful, dangerous beings were hunting her for reasons none of them understood. And she was out there alone, without protection, without even the knowledge of what she truly was. "We have to find her," Cassian said, his voice hard with determination. "Now, before—" A scream cut through the night. Female, terrified. And even from a distance, Cassian's newly awakened mate bond recognized it. Leora. All three brothers moved as one, running toward the sound. But as they crashed through the forest toward where her scream had originated, Cassian felt a sickening realization settle over him. They might already be too late. The scent of witch magic was thick in the air, mixed with something else. Blood. And at the center of a small clearing, illuminated by moonlight, lay a torn piece of gray fabric. The same color as the dress Leora had been wearing when she'd fled the castle. But of Leora herself, there was no sign. Only blood on the ground and the lingering echo of her terrified scream fading into the night. The blood trail led deeper into the forest, toward a section of woods so primordial that even wolves rarely ventured there. The trees grew twisted and thick, their branches forming a canopy so dense that moonlight barely penetrated. This was old magic territory, the kind of place where the veil between worlds grew thin. Cassian moved in human form now, tracking by scent and instinct. Behind him, Theron and Lysander flanked him in wolf form, their senses extended for any threat. 20 elite guards followed at a distance, armed and ready. "The blood scent is getting stronger," Theron's voice came through the brother bond, "but something's wrong with it." He was right. The blood smelled like Leora, that unique combination of wildflowers and rain that had haunted Cassian's senses since the rejection. But there was something else mixed in. Something that made his wolf recoil instinctively. Power. Raw. Uncontrolled. And absolutely terrifying in its magnitude. They emerged into a clearing that made Cassian's breath catch. The ground was scorched in a perfect circle, the grass reduced to ash. At the center stood the ruins of what looked like a stone altar, its surface covered in symbols that predated written language. And surrounding the altar were bodies, witches, at least a dozen of them, all wearing the crimson robes of the outlawed order. All dead. "What in the name of the moon goddess?" Lysander shifted to human form, staring at the carnage. The witches hadn't just been killed, they'd been obliterated. Some were burned beyond recognition. Others looked as if they'd been torn apart by massive claws. One witch lay with her chest caved in, as if something had exploded from within her. And in the center of it all, unconscious on the altar, lay Leora. She was alive. Cassian could see the rise and fall of her chest, but she was different. Her skin seemed to glow faintly with luminous energy, and her hair, which had been plain brown before, now held streaks of pure white that caught the moonlight. The torn gray dress was soaked with blood, but when Cassian approached cautiously, he realized with shock that none of it was hers. "It's the witch's blood," Theron said, kneeling beside one of the bodies. "They attacked her, and she—" He looked at the destruction around them. "She did this." "Impossible," Cassian breathed. "She doesn't have this kind of power." "She does now." The voice came from the shadows at the edge of the clearing. Elder Morgana stepped forward, leaning heavily on her staff. Her ancient eyes surveyed the scene with a mixture of sorrow and inevitability. The rejection triggered it. Her dormant abilities awakened in self-defense. "What dormant abilities?" Lysander demanded. "What is she?" Morgana was silent for a long moment, her gaze fixed on Leora's unconscious form. "Do you know the story of the first wolves, your majesties? The original pack, blessed directly by the moon goddess herself?" "Children's tales," Cassian said dismissively. "Are they?" Morgana's tone was sharp. "The first wolves weren't just blessed with strength and longevity. They were given something more fundamental. The ability to bridge worlds, to walk between the mortal realm and the divine, to channel the moon goddess's power directly. She paused. That bloodline was thought to be extinct, lost centuries ago when the first pack was slaughtered by those who feared their power. Understanding crashed over Cassian like a wave, but it wasn't extinct. No, it went into hiding, diluted itself through generations of breeding with common wolves and even humans, until the power became so weak it was almost undetectable. Morgana moved closer to the altar, her expression unreadable. Until the right catalyst came along to wake it. The rejection, Lysander whispered, horror dawning in his eyes. We rejected a first blood. Not just rejected, Morgana corrected coldly, humiliated, broken. And in doing so, you created exactly the kind of trauma necessary to shatter the mental barriers keeping her power contained. She gestured at the dead witches. The Crimson Order knew what she was. They've been searching for a first blood for decades, hoping to harvest that power for themselves. When they attacked her here, tried to complete some ritual to drain her abilities. Morgana's voice trailed off as she looked at the carnage. Her power protected itself. Violently. A low moan drew all their attention. Leora was stirring, her eyes fluttering open. For a moment they were normal. That soft brown Cassian remembered. Then they flooded with radiant light so bright it was almost painful to look at directly. She sat up in one fluid motion, her gaze sweeping across the clearing. When those luminous eyes landed on the three brothers, Cassian felt the weight of her power press against him like a physical force. You. Her voice resonated with an otherworldly echo. The kings who cast me aside. Cassian stepped forward, hands raised in a placating gesture. Leora, we need to talk. We need to explain. Explain what? She rose to her feet, and power rolled off her in visible waves, making the air shimmer. How you decided I wasn't good enough. How you humiliated me in front of your entire court. Or perhaps you'd like to explain how your rejection nearly killed me. We were wrong, Lysander said, his voice breaking. Leora, we were so wrong. We didn't know. Didn't know what? That I was powerful? Her laugh was bitter and sharp. Would it have mattered? If I'd been exactly as weak as you believed, would that have made your cruelty acceptable? The question hung in the air, unanswerable. We want to make this right, Theron said, stepping forward despite the danger radiating from her. Whatever it takes. However long it takes. We want to... To what? Unreject me? Leora's expression hardened. It doesn't work that way. The bond is broken. Shattered. Even now, I can feel the jagged edges of it inside me, cutting me apart with every breath. Cassian felt his own broken bone in that moment, the absence of something he hadn't even known he needed until it was gone. He looked down at his hands. The silver scars from where he'd touched her burning skin still marked his palms, delicate swirling patterns that had spread up his wrists, physical proof of what they'd destroyed. Then we'll find a way to repair it, he said firmly. Elder Morgana, there must be a ritual, some kind of magic. There is no ritual, Morgana said quietly. A broken mate bond cannot be mended, not by magic, not by will, not by anything in this world or the next. The words were a death sentence. Cassian felt something inside him crumble, saw the same devastation reflected on his brothers' faces. However, Morgana continued, and everyone's attention snapped to her. A broken bond can be remade. Not repaired, remade. Built from scratch, if both parties are willing. Hope flared in Cassian's chest, bright and painful. He looked at Leora, ready to beg if necessary, to promise anything she demanded. But the expression on her face killed that hope before he could speak. No. The word was flat, final and utterly devastating. Leora, please, Lysander started. No, she repeated louder this time. You don't get to reject me, break me, drive me to this. She gestured at the dead witches, at her own transformed state. And then decide you want me back because I'm suddenly powerful enough to be worthy. It's not about power, Cassian said desperately. We were fools. We were blind. But seeing you like this, Knowing what we did to you, knowing what you did to me, Leora interrupted, her voice dropping to something cold and dangerous, is exactly why I will never give you a second chance. She stepped down from the altar, her bare feet leaving glowing prints on the scorched earth. I, Leora Ashenmere, first blood of the moon goddess's original pack, formally and permanently reject Cassian, Theron, and Lysander Nightshade as potential mates. The words hit like a physical blow. All three brothers staggered, crying out in torment as luminous radiance exploded from Leora's body and slammed into them. Cassian fell to his knees, feeling something inside him tear, not just the already broken bond, but something deeper. His wolf howled in anguish, recognizing that this was truly the end. When the light faded, new marks had appeared on all three brothers' chests, directly over their hearts. Not the silver scars from touching her burning skin. These were different. Raised like brands, formed of intricate runes that glowed faintly with residual power. Rejected by the first blood, Morgana translated softly, reading the marks with ancient eyes. You'll carry those for the rest of your lives, your majesties, unless the rejection is somehow reversed, which has never been done. If you die bearing these marks, the curse will pass to the next kings in your bloodline, a permanent stain on the Nightshade legacy. Leora swayed on her feet, the massive expenditure of power clearly taking its toll. But when Lysander instinctively moved to catch her, she held up a hand that crackled with silver energy. Don't touch me. Where will you go? Theron asked, his voice hollow. You can't go back to Thornwick. The village was destroyed, and if more witches come, I'll handle it. Leora's eyes were already losing some of their luminous glow, brown bleeding back in at the edges. She looked exhausted, swaying on her feet, but her spine remained straight. I've survived rejection by my supposed true mates. I think I can handle a few power-hungry witches. She turned to leave, but Cassian couldn't let her go like this. Couldn't let this be the end. We love you. The words burst from him without thought, raw and desperate. I know we have no right to feel anything for you, no right to even speak to you after what we've done. But it's true. The moment you walked away from that hall, something inside me screamed that I'd made the worst mistake of my life, and every moment since has only proven it more true. Leora stopped walking but didn't turn around. Her shoulders were rigid, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. Love? Her voice was barely above a whisper. You don't get to call it love. Love doesn't humiliate. Love doesn't destroy. What you feel now is guilt and loss. And those are your burdens to carry, not mine. She took a step forward, and shadows seemed to rise up around her, not threatening, but protective, cloaking her form. When they cleared a moment later, she was gone, vanished as completely as if she'd never been there at all, leaving three kings kneeling in the ruins of what might have been, marked forever by the mate they'd rejected, branded with runes that proclaimed their failure for all to see. Cassian pressed a hand to the burning mark over his heart and felt tears. Something he hadn't shed since childhood streaked down his face. They had lost her. Completely. Irrevocably. Permanently. And it was no one's fault but their own. 3 weeks had passed since that night in the clearing, since Leora had permanently rejected them, since she'd burned those terrible marks into their chests, since she'd vanished into shadow and left them broken. And Cassian was dying. Not quickly, not dramatically, but slowly, inexorably, like a candle burning down to nothing. The healers called it severance sickness, the result of a completely rejected mate bond combined with the curse marks Leora had seared into their chests. The marks weren't just scars. They were active curses, draining their life force bit by bit, day by day, and feeding on the broken bond like parasites. Theron had collapsed first, 10 days after that night. He'd been in a council meeting, arguing with the nobles about trade agreements, when his legs had simply given out. The warrior who'd never shown weakness, who'd fought in battles that left lesser wolves dead, crumpled like a puppet with cut strings. Lysander lasted 12 days. The empath's sensitive nature made him more susceptible to the emotional toll, but it was the physical breakdown that took him in the end. He'd been in the gardens, trying to find some peace among the flowers, when he'd started coughing up blood. Cassian had made it to day 17 before his own body betrayed him. He'd been too stubborn to acknowledge the weakness, the way his hands shook when he tried to hold a pen, the way his vision blurred at the edges. He'd forced himself through every day, ruling with an iron will even as his body screamed for rest, but will could only carry him so far. Now, on day 21, all three brothers lay in the royal healing ward, in beds arranged in a triangle so they could see each other. Elder Morgana and her team of healers moved between them constantly, trying every remedy, every spell, and every healing technique known to wolfkind. Nothing worked. "You're dying of broken hearts," Morgana had told them bluntly on day 15. In the most literal sense, the mate bond, even broken and rejected, still exists in your souls. It wants to reform, to complete itself. But Leora's permanent rejection made that impossible, so your bodies are slowly shutting down, unable to reconcile what your souls need with what can never be. "How long?" Cassian had asked, his voice barely a rasp. Morgana's silence had been answer enough. Now Cassian lay in his bed and stared at the ceiling, counting his breaths. Each one felt harder than the last, as if his lungs were forgetting how to work. Across from him, Theron's breathing was shallow and labored. Lysander's eyes had been closed for 2 days now, his body conserving what little energy remained. The door opened and Commander Wraith entered, his expression carefully neutral. But Cassian could not see the grief in the man's eyes. Wraith had served their family for 3 decades. Watching his kings waste away like this had to be torment. "Your Majesty," Wraith said quietly, "there's news." "About her?" The question came from Theron, who'd apparently been awake despite his closed eyes. Wraith nodded. "Our scouts tracked her to the Winterspire Mountains. She's building something. A sanctuary, they said. For outcasts. Wolves who don't fit in their packs, witches who've been exiled, even some humans who've been touched by magic." Despite his weakness, Cassian felt a surge of pride. Of course she was. Of course, Leora, who'd been cast aside herself, would create a place for others like her. "Is she?" Cassian had to pause to catch his breath. "Is she safe?" "More than safe." Wraith's expression was strange. "The scout said she's become something of a legend in the Northern Territories. They're calling her the Silver Queen. Apparently, word spread about what she did to those witches. No one dares threaten her now." The Silver Queen. It suited her, Cassian thought. More than "Your Majesty" ever would have. "There's something else," Wraith continued, hesitation clear in his voice. "The scouts reported that she's been unwell. She collapsed 3 days ago during a construction project. Her people brought in a healer, but from what we heard..." He trailed off, unwilling to continue. "Say it," Cassian commanded, putting every ounce of remaining authority into his voice. "The healer said she's suffering from the same thing you are," Wraith said quietly. "Severance sickness. Her rejection of you broke the bond completely, but it's killing her too. The healer estimated she has maybe 2 weeks left. 3 at most." The room fell into shocked silence. Then Lysander's eyes snapped open. They'd been closed for 2 days. But the moment Leora's name was spoken, his body had responded. His eyes, which had been closed in what seemed like final rest, flew open with sudden alertness. "She's dying?" His voice was hoarse but urgent. "Because of what we forced her to do? The second rejection, the permanent one, it's killing her too?" Morgana appeared in the doorway as if summoned. Her ancient eyes were grave. "Of course it is. Did you think such powerful magic came without cost? She severed a mate bond so completely that it can never be remade. That kind of rejection requires enormous power, and it has to be paid for somehow. She's been paying for it every day since, just as you have." Cassian tried to sit up and failed, his arms too weak to support his weight. "We have to go to her. We have to..." "Do what?" Morgana interrupted sharply. Beg her to reverse what can't be reversed. She can't undo it, even if she wanted to. The magic is done. Permanent. All 4 of you are going to die, and there's nothing anyone can do about it. No. Theron forced himself upright through sheer will, though the effort left him gasping. There has to be something, some way. There isn't, Morgana said flatly. But something in her expression made Cassian pause. You know something, he said. I can see it in your eyes. There's something you're not telling us. For a long moment, the ancient elder was silent. Then she sighed, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of centuries. There is a possibility, she said reluctantly, but it's not a solution, it's a sacrifice. Tell us, all 3 brothers said in unison. Morgana moved to the center of the room, equidistant from all 3 beds. The mate bond between you is broken beyond repair, but the bond doesn't exist in isolation. It's connected to your life force, to your very souls. If one of you were to sever your own life completely, willingly, it would break the curse for the others. Horror dawned on Cassian's face. You're saying one of us has to die. Not just die. Choose death. Embrace it willingly, as a sacrifice for your brothers. Morgana's voice was heavy. The magic recognizes intention. If one king were to give his life freely, accepting death as payment for his crimes against his mate, it would satisfy the curse's requirements. The other 2 would live. Weak, damaged, but alive. And Leora? Lysander asked. Would it save her? Morgana shook her head. I don't know. Her curse is her own, born from her own rejection. But it's possible that such a sacrifice might weaken it enough for her to survive, or it might do nothing. There's no way to know. Silence fell over the room like a shroud. Cassian looked at his brothers, saw his own thoughts reflected in their faces. They all knew what had to happen. The only question was who. It should be me, Cassian said finally. I'm the eldest. I led us into this disaster. My pride, my obsession with finding a perfect queen, that's what started all of this. No. Theron's voice was firm despite its weakness. I'm the warrior. Dying in service to those I love is what I was born for. This is just another kind of battle, another sacrifice to be made. You're both wrong, Lysander said quietly. I'm the empath. I felt her anguish from the beginning and said nothing. I let my brothers convince me to ignore what my gift was telling me, that she was suffering, that the bond was real. This is my atonement. The argument that followed was weak and brief. They simply didn't have the strength for more, but each brother was adamant, each convinced that he should be the one to die. Finally, Morgana raised a hand. Enough. You have until dawn tomorrow to decide. After that, it will be too late. The curse will have progressed too far for the sacrifice to work. She turned to leave, then paused at the door. For what it's worth, Your Majesties, I'm sorry. You made a terrible mistake, but you didn't deserve this. When she was gone, the 3 brothers lay in silence, each wrestling with the same impossible choice. It was Cassian who finally spoke. We draw lots, write our names, mix them, and whoever's chosen goes willingly. No arguments, no regrets. Cassian, Theron started. It's the only fair way, Cassian interrupted, and it gives us each an equal chance to be the one who makes things right. Reluctantly, his brothers agreed. Wraith was called to help, to write 3 names on identical pieces of parchment and fold them so they couldn't be distinguished. Then he placed them in a bowl and held it out. I can't do this, Wraith said, his voice breaking. I can't choose which of you dies. You're not choosing, Lysander said gently. Fate is. The moon goddess is. We're just accepting her judgment. Wraith placed the bowl on a table equidistant from all 3 beds. Then you should all reach for it at the same time, on 3. Cassian took a deep breath, his hand trembling as he extended it toward the bowl. Beside him, his brothers did the same. 3 hands, 3 possible futures. 2 would live, weakened and broken, but alive. 1 would die. 1. Wraith said, his voice thick with unshed tears. Cassian's fingers brushed the cool ceramic of the bowl. 2. He could feel his brother's hands near his own, could sense their fear and determination through the fading brother bond. 3. 3 hands plunged into the bowl, 3 pieces of parchment were grasped, 3 kings looked at their chosen lots. And Cassian felt his heart sink as he unfolded his paper and read the name written there in Wraith's careful hand. Cassian. He looked up to see his brothers staring at their own papers, their faces twisted with anguish. But before anyone could speak, before they could argue or try to change what fate had decided, Cassian spoke. "It's done," he said firmly. "I'll perform the sacrifice at dawn. Commander Wraith, send a messenger to the Winterspire Mountains. Tell Leora. Tell her I'm sorry. For everything. And tell her that I hope she lives long enough to build that sanctuary into something magnificent." Theron was crying openly now, and even Lysander's eyes shone with tears. But neither argued. They'd all agreed to abide by the draw. Cassian closed his eyes, accepting his fate. At least his death would mean something. At least he could give his brothers a chance to live, to perhaps find their own mates someday, and to be better kings than he had been. At least he could die, knowing he'd finally done something right. Dawn was still an hour away when the doors to the healing ward burst open. Cassian jerked awake from his uneasy sleep, his hand instinctively going to the knife that wasn't there. Weapons had been removed from the ward days ago to prevent exactly the kind of desperate act he was planning. But it wasn't an assassin or a threat. It was her. Leora stood in the doorway, her chest heaving as if she'd been running. Her silver-streaked hair, the white strands more pronounced than before, was wild around her face. And those eyes, sometimes brown, sometimes silver, now flickering rapidly between the two, locked onto him with an intensity that stole what little breath he had left. She looked terrible. Her skin had a grayish pallor, and she was so thin that her bones stood out sharply beneath her clothing. Dark circles ringed her eyes, and there was a tremor in her hands that spoke of barely controlled weakness. She was dying. Just like them. "You can't," she said, her voice rough. "Whatever you're planning, whatever sacrifice you think you need to make, you can't." "How did you—" Cassian started, but Lysander interrupted. "I sent for her." The youngest brother's voice was weak, but defiant. His eyes, which had been closed for 2 days, had snapped open the moment Leora's scent filled the room. Even in his weakened state, his body recognized his mate. "Last night, after we drew lots, I sent Commander Wraith with a message. I told her what we were planning to do." "Lysander," Theron said, betrayal clear in his tone. "We agreed." "I agreed to let fate choose," Lysander interrupted. "I never agreed to let my brother die without giving her a chance to know. To choose for herself whether she wanted to stop it." Leora moved into the room with jerky, unsteady steps. She looked at each of them in turn, and Cassian saw something break in her expression. "You're all dying. Because of me. Because of what we forced you to do," Cassian corrected gently. "Don't take our sins onto yourself, Leora. We earned this fate." "Did you?" Her laugh was bitter. "Did you really?" "Yes. You rejected me. Yes, you were cruel and proud and stupid. But does that crime deserve death? Does one mistake, however terrible, mean all 3 of you should die?" She moved closer to Cassian's bed, and he could see tears streaming down her face. "Because if it does, then I'm just as guilty. I rejected you back. I cursed you with permanent marks. I condemned you to this fate. So if you deserve death, then so do I." "That's different," Theron protested. "You were protecting yourself. We were the ones who—" "Stop." Leora's voice cracked with power, making the room tremble. "Stop trying to be noble. Stop trying to sacrifice yourselves. Because here's the truth you need to hear. If any one of you dies, I die too. Not eventually. Immediately. The curse I placed on you is tied to my own life force. When one of you stops breathing, so do I." Morgana appeared in the doorway, her expression unreadable. "She's telling the truth," I suspected as much, but I couldn't be certain until I examined her. The magic she used to sever the bond so completely required a blood price. Her own. She's been dying in tandem with you, but if you go first, the feedback will kill her instantly. Horror crashed over Cassian. His sacrifice, the one thing he'd thought he could do to make things right, would actually kill her too. So what do we do? Lysander asked desperately. There has to be something. Some way to save at least some of us. There is one way, Leora said quietly. She moved to stand at the center of the room, equidistant from all three beds, mirroring Morgana's position from the night before. But it requires all of us to agree, to choose it together. What way? Cassian demanded. Leora took a shaking breath. We remake the bond. Not repair. Remake. Build it from nothing, with full knowledge of what we're doing. With intention and choice, and... She paused. With forgiveness. You said that was impossible, Theron protested. You said the rejection was permanent. I said it couldn't be undone, Leora corrected. And it can't. The first bond, the one the moon goddess created, is gone forever. But the moon goddess isn't the only one who can create bonds. We can create our own. It won't be the same. It won't have the same divine blessing, the same inherent strength. But if we all choose it willingly, if we build it together... She swayed on her feet. It might be enough to save us all. Or it might kill us all, Morgana said bluntly. Creating a mate bond from nothing, while all four of you are this weak, while fighting against a curse this powerful, the magical requirements are immense. The chances of success are minimal. How minimal? Cassian asked. Truthfully, less than 10%. Morgana's ancient eyes were sad. But it's more than the 0% chance you have otherwise. Silence fell over the room as each of them processed this. A 10% chance of survival. And it required Leora to bind herself to the males who'd rejected her, hurt her, and driven her to this point. Why? Cassian asked softly, looking at Leora. Why would you even consider this? We don't deserve... No, Leora interrupted. You don't. None of us deserve second chances if we're being honest. But the alternative is that we all die, and that accomplishes nothing except proving that anguish and pride are stronger than the possibility of forgiveness. She met his eyes, and for the first time since the rejection, he saw something other than anger and hurt there. He saw hope, fragile and tentative, but real. I don't want to die hating you. I don't want my last thought to be of the kings who rejected me. I want to at least try to build something different. Even if it fails? Theron asked. Even if we all die in the attempt? At least we'll die trying to save each other instead of punishing each other, Leora said. That has to count for something. Cassian looked at his brothers, saw the same desperate hope in their faces that he felt in his own chest. It was a gamble. A terrible, probably fatal gamble. But it was also the only chance they had. How do we do this? He asked. Morgana stepped forward, her expression grave. It requires a blood ritual. All four of you must be conscious and willing. You'll need to speak binding vows to each other, not the traditional mate vows, but something personal, something true. And then you'll need to seal it with blood and power. She paused. The suffering will be immense. If any one of you loses consciousness or breaks the circle before it's complete, you'll all die. We can handle suffering, Theron said, forcing himself to sit up despite the way the movement made him gasp. We're dying anyway. What's a little more torment? Lysander pushed himself upright as well, trembling with the effort. Tell us what to do. With Morgana's guidance and Wraith's help, the three brothers were moved to sitting positions on the floor, forming a triangle. Leora took her place at the center, sitting cross-legged with her hands resting on her knees. You'll each need to cut your palms, Morgana instructed, handing them ceremonial knives. When I give the signal, press your bleeding palm to hers. The connection of blood will allow your life forces to mingle, to search for points of compatibility. From there, you must speak your vows. not to the moon goddess, but to each other, promises you truly intend to keep. Cassian took the knife with shaking hands. Beside him, his brothers did the same. All three cut their palms simultaneously, blood welling up immediately. Leora took the fourth knife and cut her own palm without hesitation, her face set with determination. Begin, Morgana said. Three male hands reached out, pressing bleeding palms against Leora's. The moment contact was made, power exploded through the room. Cassian inhaled sharply as he felt not just Leora's life force, but his brother's as well, suddenly intimately connected to his own. He could feel Theron's stubborn determination, Lysander's empathic sensitivity, and Leora's fierce, brilliant strength. And beneath it all, he could feel the curse, the dark magic that was slowly killing them all. It wrapped around their life forces like thorns, squeezing, draining, and destroying. Speak your vows, Morgana commanded. Now, while you're connected, let the words carry your intention into the bond. Cassian went first, looking directly into Leora's flickering eyes. I vow to see you as you truly are, not as I want you to be. I vow to value your strength, even when it challenges my pride. I vow to never again dismiss you, diminish you, or doubt your worth. And I vow to spend every day earning the forgiveness you've already given more generously than I deserve. Theron spoke next, his voice rough with emotion. I vow to protect you with everything I am, not because you're weak, but because you're precious. I vow to listen before I judge, to understand before I act. I vow to be the warrior you need, not the one I thought you should want. And I vow to fight for us, for this bond we're building with every breath I have left. Lysander's voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried clearly in the charged atmosphere. I vow to honor your emotions as equal to my own. I vow to speak when I should speak, to trust what I feel even when logic says otherwise. I vow to be brave enough to be vulnerable with you, to let you see all of me, the good, the damaged, the uncertain. And I vow to love you not in spite of your scars, but because they prove you're a survivor. Then it was Leora's turn. She looked at each of them in turn, her eyes shining with tears. I vow to give you the second chance I never thought I could give. I vow to see your regret as real, your growth as genuine, and your love as more than guilt. I vow to trust you with my heart, even though you broke it once, because I believe people can change. And I vow to build this bond with you as equals, four souls choosing each other, not because fate demanded it, but because we decided we were worth fighting for. The moment the last word left her mouth, the power in the room intensified 1,000-fold. Cassian screamed as he felt the curse react violently to the new bond forming, as it tried to strangle the fragile connection before it could fully establish itself. But the curse hadn't anticipated one thing: Leora's power. Radiant light exploded from her body, flooding into the bond they were creating. And unlike before, when her power had been wild and uncontrolled, this was focused, purposeful. She was using her first blood abilities not to destroy, but to create, to build, to heal. The curse fought back, dark magic clashing with luminous radiance. The torment was excruciating. Cassian felt like he was being torn apart from the inside, every nerve ending on fire. Beside him, he could hear his brothers crying out, could feel their anguish through their newly forming bond. But they didn't let go. None of them let go. Leora was glowing now, so bright it was hard to look at her directly. Her hair, already streaked with white from her awakening, seemed to pulse with luminescence, every strand transforming, the brown bleeding away until it was completely silver-white, radiant as moonlight. Her eyes blazed with pure power, no longer flickering between brown and silver, but merged into something new entirely. But that power wasn't just hers anymore. Through their joined hands, Cassian could feel it flowing into them, into their bond, into their very souls. Together, Leora gasped, her voice resonating with divine authority. Push together. Force the curse out. Cassian understood instinctively. Their bond wasn't complete yet. Was still forming. Still fragile. But if they could combine their strength, their will, their collective power, he reached out with everything he had, feeling his brothers do the same. 4 souls, 4 wills, 4 hearts beating as one. They pushed against the curse, not trying to destroy it, but simply to expel it from the space where their new bond was forming. For a moment, it seemed impossible. The curse was too strong, too deeply embedded. They were too weak, too damaged, too close to death. Then Cassian felt it. A 5th presence, vast and primordial and impossibly powerful, joining their circle. The moon goddess herself, drawn by their determination, their willingness to choose each other despite everything. She didn't repair the bond they'd broken. That was still impossible, still, beyond even divine power to fix. But she blessed the new bond they were building, poured her divine strength into their mortal efforts, and tipped the balance just enough. The curse shattered. Dark magic exploded outward, dissipating into nothing as the new bond completed itself with a flash of brilliant light so intense that everyone in the room had to shield their eyes. When the light faded, all 4 of them collapsed, hands still joined, breathing hard. Cassian realized with stunned wonder that the anguish was gone. Not just lessened, completely gone. He pressed a hand to his chest where the curse marks had burned for weeks and felt warmth. Not the searing heat of the curse, but something gentle, comforting. He looked down and saw that the runes had transformed. Where they had read, rejected by the first blood, they now proclaimed something new, chosen by the first blood. Beside him, his brothers bore identical marks, their faces slack with shock and relief. And at the center of their circle, Leora lay with her eyes closed, her chest rising and falling with steady breaths. The grayish pallor had faded from her skin, replaced by a healthy glow. The tremor in her hands had stilled. She was alive. They were all alive. Impossible, Morgana breathed, staring at them with awe. You did it. You actually did it. Leora's eyes fluttered open, and this time they were a new color. Silver and brown swirled together, perfectly merged, each visible depending on how the light caught them. She smiled, weak but genuine, and Cassian felt that smile through their new bond like sunshine after a storm. We did it, she whispered. Then, looking at each of them in turn, we chose each other. Cassian wanted to respond, to say something profound and meaningful, but his body, pushed far beyond its limits, finally surrendered. He felt his brothers collapsing as well. All 4 of them falling into unconsciousness, not from injury or curse, but from simple, complete exhaustion. His last thought before darkness claimed him was one of peace. Whatever happened next, whatever challenges they faced, they would face them together. As mates, as equals, as 4 souls who had been given an impossible second chance and seized it with both hands. 3 months later, Leora stood on the balcony of the Winterspire Sanctuary, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. Behind her, she could hear the sounds of the growing community, wolves laughing, children playing, the rhythmic hammering of construction as more buildings were added to house the ever-increasing number of outcasts who'd found their way here. The Silver Queen's Sanctuary. That's what they called it now. A place where bloodlines and purity didn't matter, where strength was measured in compassion rather than power, where everyone was welcome regardless of their past. Strong arms wrapped around her waist from behind, and she smiled as Lysander rested his chin on her shoulder. You're contemplating again. I'm not brooding, I'm reflecting. That's just brooding with better vocabulary. Theron appeared on her other side, leaning against the balcony railing. Come on, admit it. You're worried about the council meeting tomorrow. Leora sighed. He wasn't wrong. Tomorrow, she and her mates would return to the capital for the first time since the bonding. The Council of Elders had formally requested their presence to discuss the future of the kingdom and the unprecedented bond between a first blood and the triplet kings. They're going to hate me, she said quietly. The nobles, I mean. They already thought I was too weak to be queen. Now I'm not just queen. I'm something they don't understand and probably fear. Let them fear, Cassian said, emerging from the doorway with a tray of tea. He'd taken to doing small domestic tasks like this, gestures of service that said more than words ever could. Let them whisper and scheme and plot. You're not the same woman they rejected, and we're not the same kings who did the rejecting. He was right, Leora knew. In the 3 months since the bonding, everything had changed. The bond they'd built, not divine, not perfect, but theirs, had grown stronger every day. It wasn't like the stories, wasn't the instant connection of traditional mates. Instead, it was something they cultivated, nurtured, chose, over and over again, and it was better than anything fate could have given them. Besides, Lysander added, his empathic abilities letting him feel her lingering doubts. You're not alone. Whatever happens tomorrow, we face it together. That's what we vowed, remember? 4 souls choosing each other. Leora turned in his arms, looking at each of her mates in turn. Cassian, who'd learned to value people over politics. Theron, who'd discovered that true strength included the courage to be wrong. Lysander, who'd found his voice and learned to trust it. And herself, the farmer's daughter who'd become the Silver Queen, who'd built a sanctuary from ashes and chosen to forgive the unforgivable. Together, she agreed, pulling them all into an embrace. Through their bond, she could feel their love, their commitment, their unwavering determination to be worthy of the second chance they'd been given. Tomorrow they would return to the capital as something unprecedented, a first blood mated to 3 Alpha Kings, united by choice rather than fate. Tomorrow they would face the council and prove that second chances were worth fighting for. Tomorrow they would begin reshaping a kingdom that valued compassion as much as strength. But tonight, they would simply be 4 souls who'd found each other in the darkness and built something beautiful from the ruins of their mistakes. And that, Leora thought as the sun set over the mountains and her mates held her close, was more than enough. It was everything.